This happened to me during the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016, until I moved due to the fear of living alone in my apartment. Slight backstory. I'm a 22-year-old British female, and I've been living in Japan since April of 2015. The apartment I first lived in was rented out by a company connected to my school. It wasn't a good apartment at all, but at the same time, I didn't know what the general quality and size versus price of Japanese apartments were, and I got given one of the 5 that I chose before I moved. The apartment was seriously tiny. 1 room, kitchen connected and bed about 2 steps away from it. I could walk the length of my whole apartment about 10 steps. But I was excited, because it was my first time living alone, and in a country that I previously only dreamt about living in. After about a month of living and studying in Japan, I met my ex-boyfriend. He told me that the area I lived in was not a good one, and known for inhabiting creepy people. He warned me not to walk alone at night anymore, or if I did, to not wear headphones and be wary. I kicked myself for the countless times I'd walked the 30-minute journey home from the clubs while really drunk after hearing this. Japan is generally a really safe country, but not so much for females that are alone. Anyway, answer the story. I've been living there for 6 months when my best friend returned to England and moved out. This left me a little scared because I had noticed previously that the neighbor on my left was a bit odd. He would constantly clear his throat as if he was coughing up a hairball or something. He didn't live immediately next to me, but down the hall, so when I exited my room and looked left, his door was in view. On the left were stone stairs going up to nothing since I was on the top floor, and if you went past the stairs you'd be standing outside his door. On the left is more hallway and stairs going down. I only took those stairs to do my washing, shared machines on the bottom floor. Otherwise, I always used the stairs on my right at the end of the hall, because the stairs leading to the washing machines were always full of spiders. My friend moved out, and after that I noticed this guy around a lot more. At this point I had never seen his face, but I could tell when he was out or in his place for the evenings due to the light that would yellow his peephole if it was on. My peephole was smashed by a previous tenant, so if he looked at mine he wouldn't be able to tell if I was in or not, luckily. He still cleared his throat all the time, and despite having space between us, it was loud enough to sound like it was coming from outside my door. That's how loud he did it. To be fair though, our walls were pretty thin. I didn't think much of him, until I started noticing that when I went outside my door to smoke, in clear view if he were to look through his peephole, his light would suddenly turn off. I didn't think too deeply about it, since I would usually go out at night. I thought maybe he just decided to go to bed, and I coincidentally saw it every time. Anyway, one day I went out for a cigarette, and I saw his peephole go black. I stared at it while I smoked, trying to pick up any changes in light to confirm or disprove my theory that he hadn't turned the light off, and it was in fact blackened out by his own face. I was stood up this time for some reason. I usually sat down, but I had a weird feeling on this day and stayed standing. I forgot to mention that our doors are metal, so opening and closing them makes a really loud noise. I stubbed out my cigarette and put it in my ashtray, when I noticed him open his door and start coming out. I was on high alert, so a bit panicked, but I thought, meh, he's probably just taking his trash out or something. Then my blood went cold as I noticed he wasn't holding anything at all. He was just standing there, facing directly at me. I tried to turn slowly and naturally as possible to go back into my apartment, as he started walking, past the hall to the stairs and towards my apartment. The path was straight, so if he was intending on walking past me, he'd have kept his feet straight, but he didn't. His walk was angled towards me, and the space between our doors was less than 3 meters. I opened my door when he suddenly started to walk much faster. I got around my door and entered, closing it, and had just enough time to see him lurch towards my door as I slammed it shut and locked it. He stopped outside. I couldn't see him because of my broken peephole, but I didn't hear him keep going past my door or going back to his, so I knew he was right there on the other side. As I was listening intently, I saw my handle very slightly start to jiggle. He was trying to open my fucking door, with who knows what intentions. I waited for maybe 30 seconds before I finally heard him turn and walk back to his place, and heard the door close. I was extremely panicked at this point, so I called my male school friend and explained everything. He asked if I wanted him to come over, but he lived pretty far from me and it was already late, so I told him I'd be okay. He stayed on the phone with me for a while as I calmed down. During our conversation, he asked me to open my door and close it, just to see if the guy would come out again. I did, making a show of opening and closing it hard, listening intently. And to no one's surprise, I heard his door creak open and close again after he probably paused and stared, wondering why he'd heard my door but not seen me. After this, I was scared to be in my apartment at night or to go out for cigarettes. I started testing it. Leave my room silently. Smoke. His peephole wasn't black when I went out silently, thus confirming that it had been him watching me as I smoked all those times before. Then close my door normally after I was done and listen. Sure enough, every time I closed mine, I'd hear his door open. Occasionally, I heard him come to my door and just stand there, probably listening for a sign if I was in or not. One night, I was out smoking, and the creep came home as I was there. I was frozen still, staring him out of the corner of my eye. He didn't even open his door at first. He just stood there staring at it for way longer than normal. I'd almost finished my cigarette when he finally opened it and went in. Another thing that I can't 100% say was him, but I'm pretty sure. Sometimes I would smoke in the stairwell when it was raining, because the rain would hit me when I stood outside my door. I smoked, put my cigarette in my ashtray. It was kinda smelly, so I left it there on the stairwell. Third step, same one I habitually sat on when I smoked there. Left it tucked in the corner by the wall and went inside, closing my door normally and went to bed. I knew the people that lived on my right, 1 to 3 doors down. We all used the second stairwell when we went out, not the one I was sat on, and I know for a fact they don't smoke. On the left of my creepy neighbor's room was a Chinese couple that I didn't know. They and the creep always used the stairs that led down to the washing machines. The stairs I sat on, as I said before, aren't used because they go up to nothing, and they aren't even visible until you walk around a corner. Anyway, I go back the next morning to get my ashtray, and not only was it now a couple of steps up and in the middle, there was a cigarette butt and a scrunched up pack of cigarettes, same brand that I smoke. I don't know if it was him, but that stairwell is only easily visible to us. This was all happening over end months of 2015 and beginning of 2016. The thing that finally convinced me to move was the following. I'd been out for dinner with my boyfriend, and we got back after 11. To enter the gate of my apartment after 11 p.m., you need a key as they lock it. I was walking faster than my boyfriend, turned a corner leading to my apartment, and saw a figure standing in the darkness near the gate, waiting and watching me approach. He started to appear from the shadows, away from the apartment and towards me. My boyfriend turned the corner, and as soon as the guy noticed him, he pulled his phone out and quite clearly pretended to talk to someone on it. My boyfriend and I walked past as he slowly followed. I didn't realize at this point that it was my creepy neighbor, but we were silent, both wary of the situation. As I got to the gate, I noticed that it was locked and started searching my bag for my keys. The guy came up, said excuse me, and nonchalantly opened the gate and stood on the other side. I had found my keys by this point, and was holding them ready to lock the gate again. But the guy was stood as if he was waiting to see if my boyfriend would enter with me or not. I showed him my keys, said thank you, and then I locked the gate myself. He reluctantly left before my boyfriend had come in, and we watched him go up the stairs, but didn't see which apartment he went to. When I saw he'd used the washing machine stairs, it clicked that it was my creepy neighbor, and I told my boyfriend. We went up the same stairs slowly. I went first and peered around the corner to where my neighbor lived. He was stood there, waiting, staring at his door but not opening it. He noticed me come around and turned to me, staring until he saw my boyfriend, and then went inside abruptly. This was the last incident I could handle. I knew he was up to something no good, and didn't want to wait long enough for anything else to happen. I decided to cancel my contract and move out. I had to pay a fair amount to do it too. Until the day I moved, he still did creepy things. I'd hear him outside my door, or see the black people, and just know that he was staring at me. The high school I attended was relatively small, maybe around 150 students back then. The dorm was even smaller, around 18 people, and it wasn't long before I found out that I would be rooming with Jacob for my first semester of 10th grade, something we were both hoping for since the summer. Not long after arriving, we met the other dorm students, and we were of course hazed by the old ones. During those first couple of months, the new kids stuck together both in the dorm and at school. And this is how I became friends with Harrison. Harrison was a big Chinese kid who was one grade below me in Jacob's class. He was one of the funniest people I had ever met, and he was just an all-around pretty nice guy. We would hang out all the time during school hours, and it really felt like I got to know him as the weeks passed. He was the type of kid you'd associate with the word weeb, an anime-loving, Japanese word-spouting figurine collector type of kid. Once I even went to his house, which was about 3 hours away from school, because I needed to catch the train from that particular town. Our friendship didn't last long, however, and it had nothing to do with him. I just made other friends I had more things in common with. I would occasionally say hi to Harrison if I passed him in school, but I never really talked to him in the dorms anymore. My 10th grade year passed, and Jacob and I became even closer friends. In 11th grade, Mason joined our friend group. Although none of us talked to Harrison, we started to notice he had become a lot more sluggish and depressed-like. Harrison's roommate would tell us about how he would never clean up after himself. Harrison would sleep on top of his dirty laundry and wouldn't flush the bathroom, something that caused a lot of problems with his other 3 bathroom buddies. Our dorm parents also started having problems with Harrison. He wouldn't show up for dinner, he'd often be late for school, and he would never listen to authority. At one point, Harrison left the dorm for a while just to be with his family. Senior year, and everything was much the same with Harrison, until one specific night that got everyone in school talking. Jacob, Mason, and I were hanging out with our dorm mom when our dorm dad came into the room with a worried look on his face. "Where's Harrison?" he asked, quietly but clearly worried. And we told him we didn't know, and he stared at the ground for a moment. "Stay with my wife." And with that, he went outside hurriedly. About 20 minutes passed before he came back to the dorm. He looked serious, which was very unusual for him. After thinking for a second, he sat the 3 of us down and explained a little bit of the situation. Harrison was dangerous, and he needed to be found. He told us to stay with his wife, who was pregnant at the time, and to tackle Harrison if we saw him enter the kitchen. Up to that point, we didn't know what was going on, but we knew enough to stay up with our dorm mom. It must have been about 11 p.m. when we saw Harrison enter the dorm. We eyed him as he went to his room, and then out again. Our dorm mom was calling her husband quietly as we observed. About 5 minutes later, our dorm dad, the girls' dorm dad, the dorm administrator, and the superintendent all rushed into Harrison's room. I stayed sitting next to our dorm mom, holding her hand as she quietly told us not to tell anyone at school. Jacob, Mason, and I started talking amongst ourselves. We had no idea why this was happening. All we knew was that Harrison was an unhygienic guy with mood issues. He eventually went to bed after my dorm mom had calmed down. The following night, our dorm dad held a meeting. He didn't really tell us anything, but he did tell us that Harrison would not be coming back to the dorm. He also told us not to tell any people at school. Everyone in high school was talking about it by the next week. Harrison eventually returned to school a month after the incident, but because he wasn't allowed in our dorm, his parents rented an apartment near school. I didn't see much of him after that, and I eventually graduated. I moved to the city where Jacob's family lived, and so I kept in touch with him all the time. I wish the story ended here, but unfortunately it took an even more sinister turn. One morning I get a call from Jacob's dad. He wanted to talk about something with me, something that had happened to Jacob. He told me that ever since the incident, the school administration had taken a closer look at Harrison's situation, eventually deciding to search his phone and laptop. They found over 200 pictures of Jacob on his phone alone, along with other disturbing images. Plus, they weren't pictures he had taken off Jacob's Facebook or anything. These were pictures Harrison had secretly taken. The weird thing was that Harrison never seemed to stalk Jacob, as Jacob himself related to me afterwards. None of us ever suspected a thing. Jacob's dad also told me that once they found the pictures, they took Harrison in for questioning. Harrison confessed that he constantly fantasized about murdering Jacob. But it wasn't just murder. He thought about slowly torturing Jacob, describing said torture in meticulously graphic detail. Harrison had written about it hundreds of times in his notebooks. Taking pictures of Jacob was apparently the way he'd fueled his imagination. I believe the night the three of us stayed by our dorm room was the night he was going to try and carry out the murder. The exact details of why they let him back in school after that aren't clear to me, but he was immediately expelled when they found out about the murder plot from his own mouth. Harrison had gone mad, and we hadn't even noticed, or at least we hadn't made the connection. Jacob was in shock. He told me that Harrison had planned to murder him because he felt like Jacob was the dorm dad's favorite. Harrison had such a messed up mind that he thought he would become the favorite person if he killed Jacob. I understand that Harrison's parents might not have been the best parents in the world, but that in no way justifies how deranged his motive was. Jacob, Mason, and I were all very close with our dorm mom and dad. What if he had seen the three of us as potential targets? I was relieved he had been expelled, and that nothing awful had happened while Mason and I were still in school. Jacob is all right now. It's been a while since Harrison was expelled. For a while, his parents were worried because Harrison still lived nearby in the same city. But I think those fears have died down since nobody has heard much about him since. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. Also, I'm posting this on mobile, so the format might not be the best. This will most likely be quite lengthy, as I want to provide as much detail as possible. A little background. I'm a 22-year-old female, and I come from the US, but I'm currently living in Germany for a work study. I'm traveling alone, but I'm fluent in German, and I've always been fairly confident in my ability to live alone and defend myself, considering I stand at about 5'11" and carry 3 different forms of self-defense on me at all times. I've been here for a little over a month, and I absolutely love everything about it, besides this experience. This happened roughly 3 weeks ago. After exploring my semi-large home city in Germany for a few weeks, I wanted to check out a nearby country. I've always been jealous of how Europeans can travel to countries like Americans can travel from state to state, and my dad generously offered to pay for my travels while I'm living here, so I wanted to take advantage of that and experience a bit of different culture. After doing loads of research, I decided upon the Netherlands. I've always been curious about Dutch culture, and I was very excited to do some more exploring, even if it was just for a weekend. I chose a small city in the south of the Netherlands, so I only traveled about 4.5 hours to get there. I had some lovely Dutch food, and got to experience the Saturday market in the city center, which was filled with local goods. On my last day in the Netherlands, I decided to check out a local Dutch coffee shop. Most of you probably already know, but some Dutch coffee shops sell weed for recreational use, and have areas where you can smoke and talk to people. Since I've never been to anything like this before, I was excited and a bit nervous. I smoke relatively frequently back home, so I wasn't going into this completely blind. When I walked in, I had to register for an account, and the staff took my picture and passport and gave me an account number. I was a little uneasy about this, considering I didn't want my passport and a coffee club account to go hand in hand, but I've heard that several coffee shops do this, so I wasn't super worried. I didn't want to bring the butt across borders because I didn't want to risk getting torn in half by the German police, so I decided I'd find someone to smoke with and grab a train afterwards. It was only about 1:30 p.m. as I made my way to the chill zone, A hazy room filled with foreigners and locals, all ripping bongs and dragging blunts. Amongst quite a few 20-something-year-old men, I see two girls sitting alone at a table for four and ask if I could join. They happily oblige and we start chatting. They introduce themselves as Alex and Jen. Both of them were Germans, and when I mentioned that I'm from the US, they got really excited and started gushing about how awesome California must be. Not even a minute after I start talking to them, some lanky, freaky-looking boy lurks over from a different table and says, "Oh, you're from the US. We were just talking about how we wish we could afford to travel there." Immediately after saying this, he sits down across from me, despite the fact that nobody invited him to. Looks-wise, this guy appeared to be anywhere between 25 and 30, relatively scraggly with big, hazed-over brown eyes, shaggy brown hair, and a very large mouth, of which was always slightly ajar. Though he was slightly unkempt, he seemed like a relatively normal guy, despite inviting himself to pop a squat with us. Lurky Boy starts asking us normal questions. Where are you from? Where do you work? How do you like the Netherlands? And all that stuff. The way he spoke was slightly slurred, though, as if he'd been drinking a lot, but I couldn't smell alcohol on him and he didn't seem to be drunk. He was consistently hard to understand, with an accent that was possibly Dutch. For a moment I thought he might have a mental disability, so I didn't want to be rude to him and say I couldn't understand him. It also occurred to me that he might be attempting to flirt and failing miserably, so I didn't really see him as a threat. I mostly nodded at what he said or threw in a yeah for sure here and there, while Alex and Jen were pretty quiet. Something about him was off-putting. I just couldn't figure out what it was. After a few minutes of barely coherent conversation, Alex asks if Lurky Boy can roll us a joint since none of us know how to. He says yes and offers to grind our bud. We give him the go-ahead and he suddenly takes all of it and leaves the chill zone to grind it at the bar. This is where we start to get concerned. Tons of people in the chill zone had grinders right in front of them, and there was no reason for him to leave to grind our bud. I began to worry he might be putting something into it. Alex and Jen both admits that he freaks them out too, and I decide to keep an eye on him through the glass door, though he had his back to us. I closely watch him when he turns around and gives me this wide, toothy smile, almost like he was laughing. I instantly got chills. He continued to stare directly at me, smiling as he spent 10 minutes grinding our bud. Lurky Boy wanders back in and hands us each our small bags of bud, then grabs a paper to start rolling. I'm not shitting you when I say that he took 30 minutes to roll one loose, horrible joint. His hands were shaking the entire time, almost violently. I started to wonder if he might be on something else. The joint immediately falls apart, and he asks Alex, who was sitting directly next to him, to lick it and fix it. He's smiling and staring intently at her as she's about to lick it, and she says, "You really don't have to watch me do it." He responds again with some incoherent jibber-jabber as I turn to the girls sitting behind me and ask if they could roll it for me. They do it in less than 5 minutes. The shitty joint falls apart about 3 more times, and we decide to just smoke the one that the girls rolled, as we all wanted Lurky Boy to get the hell away from us at this point. I come up with a half-assed plan as we light it, and I say, "Hey, we appreciate you helping us, but these are my friends that I haven't seen since the last time I was in Germany, and we really just want to catch up and have some girl time." Seems nice enough. Lurky Boy responds with, "You guys can talk with me right here. I don't have to leave." Alex immediately repeats the same thing I said, phrased a bit differently, and he says again, "I'm staying here. You can pretend you're alone and just talk with me here." At this point, alarm bells were starting to go off. Lurky Boy isn't leaving, and I can't think of anything to say to make him go. Jen, who has been quiet almost the whole time, staring at the table, but Alex is starting to realize that we really need to do something. Alex says to him, "Please, we don't want to be rude. We just haven't seen each other in so long and we want to catch up one-on-one." Lurky Boy aggressively shoots back with, "How did you all meet then? Where did you meet? In what city? Why are you all friends?" And then he directed at me, "Why were you in Germany? And where were you?" Fuck. Now I need a real story, or at least one convincing enough to shoo him away. I say something along the lines of, I was visiting a big city in Germany to find an apartment for my upcoming work study, and I met them in a pub. Sounded pretty legit. Lurky Boy nods and seems convinced enough. Alex immediately follows again, asking if he could please go back to his friends so we could talk. But Lurky Boy says yet again, I don't need to leave for you all to talk. He then says that we should start fresh, and asks me and only me what my name is while extending a shaking hand. Suddenly every story I've read on here is rushing back to me, and I realize all the things I've done wrong. I told him where I work. I told him where I live. I told him where I'm from. Fuck. My name is my last saving grace, so I blurt out a fake name, Trisha. He repeats my name and nods, but doesn't tell me his. Now I've reached my limit. We've tried being polite to no avail. We've spent over an hour dealing with this creepy-ass dude, and we've all had enough of it. I look him in the eyes and sternly say, You're making us uncomfortable. Leave us alone now. Lurky Boy leans in until he's only a few inches from my face, his eyes almost quivering, and he says in a quiet, low tone, I know people at your work. People that are above you. You really don't want to mess with me because I could ruin your fucking life. I could fuck you up. As he says this, his slurring in his voice vanishes. I feel the blood draining from my face, and my head starts tingling. I almost feel like I'm about to burst into tears or throw up. Maybe both. I quickly grab my bag and tell him that I'm going to leave because he's making me uncomfortable. Then the final blood-curdling comment comes from him. I think we'll be on the same train. Now that I know where you live, I think it's time for me to go too. I rush outside in a panic, borderline hyperventilating as Alex and Jen follow suit. We simultaneously say what the fuck, and hurry away from the coffee shop. We end up exchanging numbers and going our separate ways. Now for a slightly happier ending. After I sprinted to the train station, I realized I had left my Primark bag at the coffee shop. I honestly hesitated, as I really didn't want to run into Lurky Boy again, but I wanted my €30 worth of useless goodies, so I ran back. I stood outside, briefly explained to the security guard what had happened and why I left so quickly. He replied that they had kicked him out, and that he was never allowed back there again, and handed me my bag. Honestly, I believed that without Alex and Jen there, things would have gone very differently. I think Lurky Boy had some seriously fucked up intentions, and the only thing stopping him was the fact that we were all together in a group.